Now we will start the discussion session. President Kitano, please.
Yes, with that, I would like to invite the panelists and then their position talk. First, I'd like to invite Dr. David Luke from the Director of Prize Operation in XPRIZE. Can you jack in there? David, are you there?
Hello, Kitano, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you well.
Okay, wonderful. Hi.
Hi.
Hi, David Locke here, Prize Director of the ANA Avatar XPRIZE. I actually made the mistake today of not wearing a suit and tie, so I thought it would be best to come on in using my ANA avatar here that you see today. But I've actually had the privilege of working at XPRIZE for the past 12 years, and I've had the privilege of working on 7 different prizes during that time frame, including most recently the Google Lunar XPRIZE and of course now the ANA Avatar XPRIZE. As somebody who helps teams achieve their moonshot goals each and every single day, it's been fascinating for me to be here today and hear everybody's different perspectives on what a moonshot is, and more importantly, how we can help teams and companies and businesses and governments, in this sense, achieve some of those moonshot goals. Of course, at XPRIZE, as Anusha had mentioned, we focus on incentivized prize competitions for breakthroughs in technology. So we will identify areas that are either stuck or that don't exist at all, and then we'll challenge teams from around the world to go out and solve some of those major problems. Actually, as I look around the audience today, I think I might not be the only person not wearing a tie. So you know what, I'm going to go ahead and jump on out here. Hang on just a sec. Sea of avatars here. Hello, everybody.
Hey, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me today. So, of course, what we're seeing here is really version 1.0 of where we see avatar technologies being able to go. A huge kudos to ANA Airlines, who came to XPRIZE Foundation to develop this audacious goal of where we see avatar technology evolving to. So, the ANA Avatar XPRIZE is a 4-year, $10 million competition that challenges teams to develop a physical robotic avatar system that can transfer a user's actions, their senses, and their presence to a remote location in real time. And we see this as the access point of being able to break the barriers of both distance and time. It allows you, the user, inside this avatar to go anywhere at any time that you want. The 3 main points that we're really focusing on currently on the Avatar XPRIZE is the ability to establish a human-to-human connection while using your avatar system. While you're in that remote location, do you, as the user, feel as if you are there in that location? And equally as important, do the people that you're interacting with feel that you are there with them as well? So whether you're visiting your grandmother, or you're checking in on your child, or you're having a business meeting, it's important that both you and the people in the room feel that you are there with them as well. Secondly, we see this as an opportunity for people to transport their trade or their skill sets to that remote location. So for example, if you're a doctor or a teacher or an engineer, and you can't travel halfway across the world to take a meeting or to solve a particular problem, we foresee a future where you'll be able to use your avatar to access that location. And lastly, exploration. I think that's huge. The ability, the opportunity to go anywhere at any time using your avatar system. So whether you want to go on vacation or go check out a location, or you want to go to somewhere that might not be accessible, for, let's say, space or deep oceans, or areas that might be not safe for human beings, like disaster relief situations. We currently have 99 teams from 21 different countries that are competing in this XPRIZE, including 14 teams from here in Japan, which is something that I'm very, very excited about. I've had the opportunity to visit many times over the years, working with different XPRIZE challenges, and I think this is really key. It's going to be a key competition in bringing in some of these technologies that we're seeing right here in Japan, which is why I think this very audacious Moonshot program is going to be a success. There's a need for the technology, and there's an obvious skill set. There's a talent pool here to draw from to make this program a success, and I know that myself, ANA, and the rest of the XPRIZE Foundation look forward to seeing that come into fruition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David.
Thank you.
Okay, next, I would like to invite Dr. Wolfgang Burtscher, Deputy Director General of the European Commission. Wolfgang, please.
Dear colleagues, again, welcome. I will be quite short. I think this discussion in the symposium has been an eye-opener for me in the sense that it shows that there are different notions of what constitutes a mission. We have seen here moonshots relating to prizes, which are achieved through prizes. There are moonshots relating to new technologies like the quantum computing, where we have in the European Union similar tools, but we do not call them missions because, for example, we have a public-private partnerships for the quantum computing. We have prizes in different areas. So I think it's interesting to see what a moonshot or a mission constitutes. Let us remind shortly what our definition is, and I think we will take it from there. I recall how we define a mission. A mission, be relevant for a significant part of the European population. So it's very important that this is inspirational for the European citizens. That's the first criteria. Have an impact on society and policy making through science and technology, and achieve within a set time frame a measurable goal that could not be achieved through individual actions. And against that background, we have determined the 5 mission areas I have presented to you earlier today: cancer, climate change, adaptation to climate change and social transformation, soil health, clean oceans, climate neutral cities. Now, it is about to really determine in detail the exact targets in these mission areas. And here again, this question arises: being inspirational, addressing challenges that are important for society. And I think Minister Akaishi has really presented it very well. If it is too bold, it's not realistic. If it's too little, it's not inspirational. And I will give you an example which we have experienced when we have gone through, and the discussion is still going on, so I do not tell you any indiscreet discussions. But for example, cancer. Evidently, you could have a mission about eradication of cancer. That is bold, but is it credible? You have a smaller one, eradicate child cancer. It's probably realistic, you can do in time bound, but is it inspirational for a big part of the European society? So I think that shows the challenges of defining the mission areas, and then specifically the missions more specifically. I think if you look at our 5 missions, what has been decisive for defining the mission areas, it were the following consideration. The planet is facing existential threats. I think there is plenty of scientific evidence confirming these facts. In order to address this issue, the European Union has recently decided to launch a Green Deal that addresses in many respects these challenges and has as an objective to have a climate neutral Europe by 2050. And if you look at our missions, at least 4 out of these 5 missions address these specific challenges. And I think we will be able to determine in these areas missions that are time-bound, that are interesting for the public, European public, and they are achievable. You will hear more tomorrow about the state of this discussion in at least 3 mission areas. It's smart cities, it's climate change, and soil health. And in these all areas, you will already see that the topics there are quite similar than the ones you are proposing in your moonshots. If you take, for example, the mission on smart and clean cities, one consideration in the mission board is to have a mission that would be having 100 climate neutral cities in Europe by 2030. And I think the research agenda would be to achieve this objective in a holistic approach, covering buildings, covering transport, covering all the elements that are decisive in a city. So I think that was a short overview of the complexity and the difficulty how to define missions in our area. But as I told you, I think an important issue is really also the inspirational nature and the acceptance and understanding of the European societies that the topics we would like to address are really important for them. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Wolfgang, for the state of the European Commissions. I have to, one thing, like, since this is All Nippon Airlines, and then a lot of people jump in, and then, if ANA requests you to put your, mobile phone into the flight mode. Thank you very much. Okay, now, I would like to invite next speaker is the Professor A.G. Yamaji, the Senior Vice President, Director General, Research Institute of Innovative, oops. Oh, it doesn't really say anything. Okay, sorry about some place. Oops. Innovative technology for the Earth. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Kitano-san, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Kenji Yamaji, Senior Vice President and Director General of RITE. RITE stands for Research Institute of Innovative Technology for the Earth, very long. But more importantly, I'm a chair of Working Group 4 of this Moonshot International Symposium. And the theme of Working Group 4 is Sustainable Resources Circulation for a Global Environment. I will briefly explain about this theme. Okay, where is the next? How to? Okay. As Kitano-san explained, Moonshot program has 3 mission areas. One is leveraging the aging society, and the second is save the earth and our civilization. And the third is exploring frontiers with science and technology. And the theme of Working Group 4, Sustainable Resources Circulation of Global Environment, it's a kind of integrated goal. Each individual moonshot goals located in the second area, save the earth and civilization. So that is the position of the theme of Working Group 4. Okay, let me explain briefly about the concept of this theme. Okay, and how do I say? This moonshot, integrated moonshot candidate in the area of 2 is the mission is to develop technology for reducing the emissions of greenhouse gases and pollutants to contribute to the recovery from the ongoing issues of global warming and environmental pollution. And the nickname of this concept is cool Earth and clean Earth. And the key approach is of course, resource circulations, but including those already emitted to the natural environment, because that is the key approach. And there are several global threats for cool Earth and clean Earth. First one I showed is a gigaton gap for below 2 degrees C target. 2 degrees target, you know, it's the goal of Paris Agreement. Okay, other than baseline emission pathways, emissions continue to go up. And by assembling a reduction effort already pledged by the parties joining Paris Agreement, then the emission lowered in the orange level. But still, there is a big gap between the Paris goal of below 2 degrees C and the current level. So it's a challenge. And second one is the lower one, is the marine plastic litter. As many of you know, the marine plastic litter is threatening many marine species, and it will eventually be a threat to our life. And the third, not the last but not in the least, but by the, how do I say, human-induced environmental change, it is pointed out our Earth is already past several planetary boundaries, and notably, the nitrogen flow is quite overflowed from the boundaries. So these are the current state of our Earth. Okay, so we are, by this integrated Moonshot goal, we challenge to solve tackle with, I should say, these global threats by technology innovations. And this is one example we are thinking, the challenge. Carbon dioxide recovery from atmosphere, it is often called DAC, direct air capture. And recovered carbon dioxide can be converted into fuel or various chemicals as a raw material. It is called carbon capture and utilization, or recently, carbon recycling, okay? So this is the image of our Moonshot goal. The blue lines, we call it a Moonshot circulation. That means that in this case, carbon dioxide emitted to the atmosphere can be recovered and then reused or stored underground. So that is the key concept. And conventional recycling system is a recycle is done before, mostly before that material is emitted to the natural environment. But in our visions, we try to recover the materials already emitted to the nature, I should say. Okay, we have prepared initiative report for this working group for theme, sustainable resources circulation of global environment. And part of the conclusion we stated, circulation of the resources that are released or disposed into the environment widely in space and thinly in concentration is clarified as an essential pathway for realizing of cool Earth and clean Earth. As a specific circulation method, there are following two methods. One is capture thin and widespread resources and circulate them artificially. And the other is to detoxify or decompose them to be circulated by nature. So that is a tentative conclusion. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Yamaji. Next, I would like to invite a guest from the Singapore, Professor Danny Sun, Executive Director of Health and Biomedical Cluster, Biomedical Research Council, at Agency of Science and Technology Research Singapore, so A-STAR. Thank you very much. Danny, please.
Very good afternoon. It gives me great pleasure to be here amongst this august audience this afternoon. And I want to thank the organizers and for inviting A-STAR to be represented in this very important initiative. So I heard a little bit this morning, or rather early this afternoon, a panelist mentioned, I think, that Japan is small. If Japan is small, Singapore is several more orders of magnitude smaller than that. So if you are from overseas and you've landed last night or this morning at Narita Airport and you took a taxi to somewhere in this locality, you would have traversed the entire length of Singapore and probably dropped into the ocean, all right? So that's a 50-kilometer ride, and Singapore's 40 end-to-end. So what can Singapore do in that regard then, being so small? I think something that we have to do, sort of given the limitations of size and population and budgets even, is then that we are focused in what we can actually contribute. We are focused, and I think we are fairly, the other thing that small countries need to work hard at doing is really about collaboration. So we are very happy to be invited to be part of this, because I think there are things that Singapore can contribute to it. I think there are big parts that big countries like the US, EU, as well as Japan would do a lot of heavy lifting, but I think the specific things that Singapore perhaps could be useful in contributing. So maybe just a little bit about A-STAR. A-STAR's been around since the year 2000. And we are a science and tech organization. We have a mission release to advance science and bring innovative tech to actually bring economic growth to Singapore. And the vision is to be a leader in science, technology, and open innovation. A-STAR is composed of 4 different components. Won't really get into much detail there. There is a biomedical component, and there's also what we call science and engineering, which deals with more of the engineering side. And we're about 5,000 people strong, about 4/5 of which are scientists and technicians. So if you talk about the Moonshot priorities, so this slide here shows you the Singapore research framework for this current funding tranche. So Singapore funds research in 5-year tranches. So in this current RIE 2020 tranche, which is from 16 to 20, so we're coming to the end of it. And so lo and behold, where are we? What are the spaces that we're interested in? Advanced manufacturing, health and biomedical sciences, urban solutions, and services and digital economy. I'll say they sort of line up pretty nicely with what are the sort of focus areas for the Moonshot initiative. So we are a small country, I say economically advanced, so we're sort of subject to the vagaries of all the biomedical challenges that other advanced economies face. An aging population for sure, very low birth rates. We have high rates of diabetes, chronic illnesses, cancer is a problem. So you won't be surprised to know that under the health and biomedical science, these are all focus areas of research for Singapore. In urban solutions, for example, Singapore is highly urbanized, so the issues around temperature rises because urban environments have a higher ambient temperature than forested areas. How do you deal with designs of buildings and housing estates so that there's flow of air, movement of people? How do you reduce the use of vehicles, for example? So these are things that are highly important and close to the heart for Singapore urban planners. So these are things I think that line up really nicely with where the Moonshot initiatives are going. And what was really also illuminating for me, I think, in the prior discussions was this whole contest or tension, right, between what is basic research and what is more, say, mission-oriented, or maybe in our use, we call it use-inspired research, right, and industrial application. This is something that A-STAR, because of our positioning as a Ministry of Trade and Industry funded science and tech organization, actually feels that tension very acutely. And so we have, constantly trying to figure out what is the right balance between the basic sciences. How do we collaborate with investigators and institutes which are more upstream of us? How do we move that technology a little bit more downstream? And then how do we build that bridge to the commercial world, companies that will take a product forward? So I just talk about a couple of themes before I'll end quickly. And this one everybody's seen, really won't dwell here. Aging population, Asia is going to bear the brunt of it in the next 20 odd years. And so for Singapore, this is something that we've looked at for a while, because our population birth rate certainly is really low. And so these are sort of three themes that we've been thinking about probably over 5 to 7 years already. How do we lengthen the health span in terms of things in population insights? Are there behavioral things we can do for patients that allow them to be a bit more adherent or compliant with medications? You know, for many chronic illnesses, the issue is not so much the lack of therapies that are available. It's an issue of really compliance and access, really, more than anything else. Right, so how does one craft a public policy, or is there a tech approach that can be used that will help move that needle on that? How about productive longevity? How do we allow our seniors to retool and relearn? How do we make workplaces more amenable to their contributions, so to extend their productive working life? And third, I guess things that are a little bit more out there with regards to aging, right? Can we deal with sarcopenia? Can we deal with things like arthritis? Are there biological systems? Are they robotics? Are they sort of augmentation capabilities that can be brought to the fore? So just want to talk about two things, this and my next slide. So Gusto, so this plays into focus, right? So Gusto is a study that we started, a program started about 11 years ago, and it was really a far-sighted research program looking at birth cohorts. So what the investigator proposed to do in this particular study was to say, look, we'll take a group of pregnant ladies when they've just gotten pregnant and been diagnosed with it, seen a doctor, and we'll start phenotyping them. So we assess them for psychological state, we look at body fat composition, we look at dietary habits, we assess for psychological status, and so forth. So you got this cross-sectional look at the maternal state at that point in time. You take certain samples, blood samples, buccal swabs to store DNA, you do microbiome, and then upon delivery of the child, we do very intensive phenotyping at the point of birth. We did, again, blood samples, buccal swabs, and we actually put sort of newborns, less than a month old, through MRI machines. So through MR scanning, we're looking at things like brain volume, we're looking at abdominal size, we're looking at abdominal fat composition, and this study has gone on for over 10 years now. So you're having students now in Singapore education system at what I call primary 4, right? So maybe it's about elementary school, grade 4. And you're able to relate now a long-term study relating a mother's psychological state at the point of pregnancy with school performance at age 10. So there's a highly, deeply phenotype, not a huge number of samples, probably about 1,000 odd, but very, very long-term follow-up, very deeply phenotyped. And guess what? This particular cohort has become so valuable because it's driven public health policy. For instance, we discovered things around gestational diabetes in Singaporean mothers that we didn't know about, and it's altered the way that Singapore Health Ministry monitors pregnant ladies. It's actually attracted a huge amount of industry interest. Companies like Nestle, for example, come and knock on the door because there's such long, deep longitudinal data on nutritional state and so forth that they've sponsored some follow-on studies. So I think this idea, where does basic research go? If you deal with a science question in a deep, robust way, the industry attraction will follow. All right. Next one, I think flipping to the forward. Now, this is an effort that we are starting on. Still early days, right? Stroke will be an issue for the elderly. Other technologies that we can bring forward, I think this is one slice of something that is within A*STAR's capabilities, which sort of marries up the engineering as well as the biological side of our capabilities. And so I think just to frame where A*STAR is in terms of how we think about problems of the future, I guess these are two maybe examples. And with that, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Danny. Next, I would like to invite Dr. Rebecca Lynn Keiser, Head of Office of International Science and Engineering, National Science Foundation, United States.
very much. I like to show this slide at the beginning because it emphasizes some of the points that Jake just made, Jake Taylor. When we are looking at what we choose to fund at the National Science Foundation, we don't know what it's going to lead to. This is our history wall that's on the wall when you first enter into NSF. You can see Google here. We funded the algorithms that led to Google. We had no idea, of course, it was going to end up being Google. We funded the initial technologies that led to 3D printing. No idea, right? It was going to lead to 3D printing. We funded LIGO for 40 years through many failures and finally then proved that Einstein was right. So my main message is we can't really pick the winners, and that's why it's very important for us to fund a variety and a diversity of different ideas. At the same time, we do have 10 big ideas, and I'll tell you what that means in our context and how we chose them. So we have some good news. We just received word of our congressional appropriation for 2020. And our 2019 budget was $8.1 billion. We're going up to $8.3 billion, another $200 million to fund research. 93% of that goes right out the door to the research community. However, we receive about 50,000 proposals a year, and we can only fund about 11,000 of those. And that's not because of quality. That's because of budget. So we have to choose ideas based on the intellectual merit of them. And we decide that intellectual merit through close consultation with the research community. We have merit review panels that help us rate the projects based on intellectual merit. But then another very important aspect is that the program officers, who are rotators at NSF, look at that whole portfolio of what might be funded in a program, and they look for balance. They look for balance in diversity, balance in age of the principal investigators, and balance in the types of ideas that are in that program for the ultimate selection. So our ideas. We have 6 big research ideas, and we have 4 enabling ideas. And what we mean by big ideas is these are areas where we think if we can have focus some increased funding in them, and so for each of the research ideas, they receive about $200 million a year, and we can focus on developing the infrastructure, and we could focus on developing the workforce, both from the students all the way up to senior career level, then we feel that we can make significant advances in these areas. These are areas that are ripe for those advances if we can focus on them. The enabling ideas are ones that we know that we have to focus funding on because they're going to help across the whole span of what the research community needs at NSF. So we have these ideas in the category of pushing the boundaries of knowledge. These are going to expand our knowledge about the universe, expand our knowledge about the Earth and the biological systems here on the Earth, and expand our knowledge of the way physical processes even work in quantum so that we can push the boundaries forward, as Jake iterated before. Again, for Windows on the Universe, to expand the knowledge of the universe, we're focusing on the funding. We're focusing on the infrastructure, meaning integrating the different research facilities that we have that look at the universe so that we can share the information and data. And we're funding the connecting among the research scientists. We're bringing them together from different research disciplines so that they can make connections. We're also funding the data management and storage of what is being produced so that it could be used by the rest of the research community. And for us, that's what a big idea really means. It could lead to great understandings and discoveries. For instance, in understanding the rules of life, this is trying to understand better how genotype leads to genetic expression. right? Why do certain genetic makeups express themselves in some way in some environments and express themselves in another way in other environments? And if we can understand that better, maybe we can harness that and greatly increase something like food production by having better expression of corn genes, for instance. That might be the result. That would be great if it were, but we don't know. We have to fund it. We have to fund the great ideas in this area and see what it leads to. There are new opportunities. We know that we need to fund the data revolution. We need to fund big data. We need to fund the storage of that data, the mining of that data, as well as data science and how one teaches data science and the next generation of data scientists. They're all part of that idea. Navigating the new Arctic, we know that a lot of the Earth's changes are, the Arctic is a harbinger of those. They happen more quickly there. We need to understand what happens there so we can understand changes in the rest of the Earth. So we're going to focus our funding there as well. And work at the human technology frontier, the interaction between humans and machines. Of course, we're all trying to understand this better. The advantage of what we're trying to do is, again, we're looking at it in a multidisciplinary way, bringing together social, behavioral, economic scientists together with physicists and engineers and biologists so that we could better understand how this is developing in our world. These gaps, I won't touch on all of them. I'll touch on includes because, again, this is an extremely important gap that we feel we need to fill. And this is in the area of diversity that we've talked about a lot today. We have individual cases where in the United States there are means by which diversity has increased in particular scientific areas. But they're at small scale. We don't understand how to increase that scale, how you can have a practice in place that's going to increase diversity across an entire scientific area, for instance, or across an entire region of the country, or across an entire group. And this is ways that we can scale up diversity efforts in those ways. And so we're funding a lot of pilot projects and getting lessons learned there. And convergence research is something that's extremely important to all of us. It is not even just interdisciplinary research, but it's ways that we could seed completely new areas of science by bringing together the tools from different scientific areas together. Okay. So we identified the big ideas. In a bottom-up approach. We consulted with the scientific community through our advisory committees, through the national academies, through community engagements from our directorates that all come from the community themselves. And then we narrowed these many ideas that came from that based on, are these things that fit within what NSF does? Do they fit within this area of basic research that then is on the cusp of readiness for significant advances? We wanted to make sure that the ideas were interdisciplinary and convergent. And that's how we came up with the big ideas. All of the big ideas, international engagement is essential. And the reason why is because through international collaboration, we create a globally engaged workforce that's essential for all scientific fields today. It's a mutually beneficial international partnership. We all gain from it intellectually as well as through the close connections that we make. And it really does provide opportunities for our leadership to help shape the global science and engineering agenda. It gives us a seat at the table. We need to continue to have that seat at the table. We already collaborate with Japan in many of the big ideas. We couldn't have done the Event Horizon Telescope black hole image without our Japanese colleagues, as well as colleagues all over the globe. As you know, we had 6 international press conferences simultaneously, including one in Japan, to announce this big image. The data revolution includes our collaboration with JST on smart and connected communities. And we recently had a mission to Japan in the Quantum Leap, where we visited many quantum labs. And this is resulting in a workshop with NTT Basic Labs that's going to be occurring in 2020. Another big part, of course, of the big ideas and research overall, and Jake touched on this, I just wanted to give a little bit more detail, is the fact that we need to work together across the US government to create a safe and inclusive research environment for our researchers that also emphasizes research integrity, where we reduce administrative burden to the research community as much as possible. So we have a new committee called the Joint Committee on the Research Environment, or JCOR, that's made up of most of the science and technology agencies across the government, that's led by the Office of Science and Technology Policy at the White House. And we have several different committees that are part of that. I co-chair a committee called Research Protection or Research Security, together with the National Institutes of Health and the Department of Energy and OSTP, where we look to maintain these values of openness and transparency and reciprocity that are extremely important. NSF also co-chairs an equally important one of the subcommittees on this safe and inclusive working environment that looks at ways that we can put it into practice anti-harassment policies and other diversity policies to make sure that we encourage everyone to be part of the scientific effort. So even though the United States is incredibly decentralized, we all have our different missions, we have a good ecosystem, and we all, I think, really understand our roles in it, and we work very closely together. And I think that we are very proud at NSF of the ways that we have formed the big ideas to focus on our research mission to then feed into other parts of the government when they're ready. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Rebecca. I would like to invite the other panelists. Jacob, please come up to the stage, and Ando-san, please come up to the stage. Let's start the discussion now. Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone. And Ando-san, he's Ando-san is okay. Sorry about this. Senior staff writer for Nikkei newspaper. Nikkei is a very eminent economic newspapers and an appearance company of the Financial Times now. Ando-san, I think you are the eminent journalist, and you heard about this Moonshot, and you have all the presentation today. And what's your take?
Yeah, I heard so many good things about Moonshot, so I will not repeat that. Instead, I would like to mention some of the problems that I felt. Yeah. The first one is the biggest thing here is I think there's not much enthusiasm around this Moonshot. If you go on the street and ask someone, do you know Moonshot? The answer would be, what? Moon what? Hayabusa? No, Hayabusa is not moon. So it's something like that. And why there's not much enthusiasm? Maybe because there's not enough public input here. Kitano-san said this is going to be a social, what was that?
Techno-social transformation.
Yeah, so there should be more of social involvement, which is not quite the case now. And also, I felt that there are 25 projects here. Kitano-san said it's not like that all is going to be done, but still it's too many, too kind of diverse, and I think it'll be really difficult to choose from this, but I hope you can really focus on some real big issues. And to do that, I think you need more inputs from maybe younger scientists, and again from the public to do that. And just one more thing about this project. I was wondering if this is going to be really a sustainable project. Some goals should be achieved in 20, 30, 40 years. During that period of time should this project really continue? I worry because there are some cases in Japan, often there are big projects, 5 years, then finished. Kitano-san mentioned about Phantom and IPS. Phantom had some real difficult time getting enough budget, and IPS, the government promised that it will spend $1 billion roughly in 10 years. Now we're in our 7th year, and already it is going into the clinical trial now. So it's really a start takeoff, but now in the government, there are discussions we should stop this now and spend that money to more trendy things. So the scientists and everybody should, in order for them to have more confidence, I think you really have to be committed that this should be a sustainable project. These are some things that I problem.
Thank you very much. I think those are very valid points. One is a public engagement and the public, enthusiasm on the Moonshot. And second one is how we're going to really select the important one and focus on that. So rather than having 25 goals going all together and turn into the little chunk of a small project. And then the third one is the stability of the funding over like 5 to 10 years. Like can we continue like 20 years and all that? So those are valid points. From the, I think like U.S. is how the U.S. managing this kind of ideas. If one is the public engagement or like sustainable funding. Yeah.
So I think it's important when you look at sustained funding and you look at the questions of how you get the public engagement, there's stages. And one of the things I find very intriguing about the Moonshot program is that there's a lot of ideas about how we're going to do research that are being engaged. And as this was mentioned, in some sense, this is the first part of the Moonshot is this risk-taking about how we engage in research. And to go from that to large-scale projects, to give some context, right, quantum information science in the United States is just under $500 million a year, right? So that's, if you look at the Moonshots program, you've got many projects and they're going to be a lot smaller, but this is a seed opportunity. So the public engagement may not be as strong, but it's really an opportunity to build that public engagement so that you can get a sustained effort. So, the constitutional approach of a constitutional republic or democracy is to, work with the people, and as the investment increases, the public engagement through the legislature is the path. Yeah. And this is certainly how we do it in the U.S.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I think it's
and if I may just add to that.
Yeah, sure. Rebecca, please.
I think it's also important to include different public stakeholder groups in the shaping of the ideas themselves from very early on. Consultations with the public in different forms. We do it, of course, through our advisory committees and the academies at the scientific level. We also go out and do a lot of public engagement, a lot of speaking, and get those ideas, get ideas through requests for information, and make sure that when we get comments from the public, we respond to each and every one of them. So I think getting them involved and then taking those ideas very seriously to help shape the concepts at the beginning is a great way to get the buy-in.
Oh, thank you very much. Wolfgang.
Thank you very much. Just on the question of enthusiasm, I think the result of defining targets for missions or moonshots is different if you ask researchers and if you ask citizens. And I do not qualify which one is scientifically the better one, but surely the result will be a different one. In the case if you ask the research community, it's more about technological achievements, whereas society wants to solutions to their problems, and this is not mutually exclusive, but the way how you formulate the mission will be different, and this is why we have put quite a lot of emphasis on this visibility for citizens in the choosing our mission areas, and as a consequence also the missions more specifically. But I admit that one of the biggest challenge in this exercise is, I think we are quite advanced in involving, evidently, the research community, the business community, public policy makers, but the most difficult part is indeed to involve citizens. And we have 500 million citizens in Europe, so how do you involve them in designing the missions now more specifically? And I think we make really big efforts now through these mission boards, which are composed of 15 people each of the 5 missions, and they are covering almost all member states, that these mission board members go to their countries and discuss with stakeholder organizations, but also with citizens, these research agendas on the European level. So this is a first-time exercise, but I think it's really important to connect citizens with research and innovation policies.
Well, thank you very much. Well, I think it's like an interesting point here is in what stage should we actually involve the citizens? Like, Moonshot is a very early stage of the development. We're having a symposium, but like we have like 25 goals, vaguely defined, frankly speaking, and now in the process to have a bit more specific and what can be done, which one to go, which one not to go. So that is a stage that we are in, rather than that we have decided that we're going to go, go for this. So like, we also have like a 1,800 comment or proposal from the citizens. Like the cabinet office actually had an open call for that. I read them all. It was very interesting, very diverse opinion. 1,800 was a lot actually. Some of them very specific, which actually included in the some of the topic. To the extreme end is something like rather than do this, just do the tax reduction kind of comments. So it's very diverse kind of comment we got. So what do you think? Like, should we? I think it's a good time to involve citizens, for instance. But like, in the process, should we involve the citizens beforehand? Like, beyond what we have, like a survey like that, or what could be the better process to get the passion out of the people?
Well, one idea, it's something that we used a lot when I was at NASA. There's a particular effort in the US, it's done by Arizona State University and the Museum of Science of Boston together. And they schedule around the country a series of town hall meetings with citizens. And what they do is, it's almost like what companies do when they're doing testing of branding. And they'll have certain ways that you might categorize a big challenge. And they see which of those resonates the most, which wording resonates, which aspect of that challenge resonates most with those different groups. So it's used not as much in your research approach to the problem, but in how you might frame the problem that is really interesting and compelling to the public.
Very interesting. I mean, in a way, this Moonshot is very different from the conventional research program, which is just like all the academic and more the industry sector. Like all the citizens involved, which is the way that we want to accomplish the final target. Then we want to involve like media. We want to involve like NGOs. It's basically a multi-stakeholder activity that we have to engage in, which was actually not really in the Japanese R&D funding scheme previously. And back to the Ando-san, what do you think? How we can, improve and how we can engage with the citizens, from your, journalistic point of view, or as one of the citizens?
I think having this big 3 goal is good. That's the mission.
Yeah.
So that could be fixed by the government. But when you make, I think Japanese government is always makes very detailed programs with detailed roadmap. So before that, I think there should be public input, not just public comments from just put the comments on the web, not that, but I think town hall type of meeting is very important. Not only in the research, but also in many areas. That's what's lacking, I think, in Japan, and that's the timing maybe could be now that you should do.
Thank you very much. That's a very good suggestion, actually. Well, On the one side is the citizen, the other side we discuss about like involving the young researchers and possibly the kids who want to be potentially involved in this program in the future because it's going to be a long one. What would be the possible measure, or you have experience of getting, what is the mechanism? For example, like an NSF, you have like all the bottom up and getting the big idea, right? How this process worked out?
So it's been a real combination. For the big ideas, the ideas themselves came from the community input through more formal types of reviews, studies, these decadal surveys, we call them, that rate the different aspects of things in different scientific areas, input from our advisory committee. But once we identified the big ideas, in all the big research ideas, we involved young researchers in a variety of ways. We held workshops, and we held ideas labs or sand pits, which I have to say the young researchers really enjoy because it helps isolate some really compelling future-looking concepts and ideas. Yeah. And then we reward the best ideas in these ideas labs with some seed funding. So that's a great way to involve them. And I think, honestly, if the ideas are exciting, the concepts are exciting, the young researchers will come. And it's a matter then of just creating that infrastructure to connect those young researchers and make sure that they know that they can propose and receive, compete for the funding for those ideas just like anyone else.
That's a great point. I mean, in the process, actually, we are really in the process of, going into the specifics of the goal and the research program. At this moment, I'm involved in one of the working group of the JST. What the, really conscious about like avoiding conflict of interest. So they are specifically excluding young researchers. They could be the recipient of the fund, so they should not be in the process. So how you're managing that conflict is so you can actually participate in the proposal process or the framing process, at the same time still able to apply and get funding.
So for us, it's really twofold because the framing process is some of the overall particular research areas or topic areas where we might want to focus a research solicitation, an announcement out to the community. And that would be where you would involve young and more advanced researchers in the framing. But then the solicitation goes out, anyone can propose, and everyone then competes on an equal basis. Yes. So that's how we really do it.
So it doesn't matter, like, potential recipients, young guys involved in the framing process, as far as they are not really reviewing their own things, yeah.
Exactly, completely separate.
Okay, thank you. It's good to hear that because we can improve that because we are now in a period of separation. So let me go to Danny. In Singapore, some of the challenge was like an aging society, which is really tied to the Singapore, the social issues. How are you actually choosing, like getting interactions involving the citizens in Singapore on this project?
That's a really good question. So I think sort of framing it back to the earlier question about involvement of the public in feedback, I guess there are several sort of, there are things which are more esoteric and maybe a little less obvious, and maybe for topics of that nature is challenging to, I think, to involve public feedback because they may not be sufficiently informed to direct it. But I think where for instance, I spoke about gathering of data. So we have a national precision medicine program that's going on in Singapore, where in fact that one, it is really important to involve public feedback because it is quite personal. There's information that we're taking from the patients or the population to derive certain insights about population outcomes and health and behaviors. Yeah. So back to the question around aging, it's certainly something which I think the government kind of struggles with the tension between what should be funded from a public policy infrastructure type investment, right? I mean, that's quick and perhaps easy to execute on, versus things that will be impactful in the longer term. I spoke about lengthening the health span, so the idea of getting a longer, healthy lifespan over the totality of your life. That's something which There are several efforts that in research that we have looked at. None of them have gone particularly far, I would have to say. It's because they've all been very challenging. I used to work in a pharma company. We've worked on efforts in sarcopenia. We've worked in efforts in terms of dementia and so forth. And those have actually, because it's complex biological systems, is very challenging to deal with on a therapeutics approach, right? So I think another alternative, I think, as we get into the greater availability of things like wearables and so forth, and of course, companies like Apple and Google are really going deep into health in a big way. Whether monitoring through wearables of behaviors and so forth give us increasing insights in terms of how the other sort of behavioral modifications, dietary type things, activity things can actually help to build strength and sort of delay the onset of frailty and dementia. So those are the things that we do have some efforts in. Health Promotion Board in Singapore particularly is very involved.
Okay. Thank you very much. I mean, now we're talking about all the government public engagement, but like any avatar XPRIZE is a private effort funded by ANA, and they got like a really very different kind of activity going on. And how you get this selection of the target in a goal, and how you involve like a researcher around the world and get like excitement around around the world.
Yeah,
how you get that?
Great question. I feel so special. I have my own microphone here, but this project has been a long time in the making. We started working with ANA all the way back in 2016 to start ideating on what this prize could be, and in the process of that, worked with a number of different advisors and experts within the field to help us develop this concept, this prize concept, and what it ultimately could be. I think something that's interesting about the XPRIZE is that it's a low barrier to get started as a team. You could come from any walk of life. It doesn't matter where you're coming from, what your education level is, whether you're a man or a woman or working in your garage or you have a very successful corporation. Anybody is welcome to enter the competition, and as long as you can show that you are meeting milestones and you are progressing in the competition in a way that shows you can demonstrate the final goal, we'll continue to push you through and incentivize you through smaller installments of either funding or support to help you reach that ultimate goal. So I think it's essential, and I think it goes back as you start to develop some of these moonshot goals. I think, yes, a town hall helps, but you have to have diversity within that room in both age and gender and many different forms.
Wow, thank you very much. Let me go to Yamaji-san. The topic Yamaji-san dealing with is climate change, global environment. This is interest to everyone, for sure. But at the same time, when you get to the real technology, how you make it like a carbon sequestration, all that, things get really technical at this moment. You need like a scientific knowledge to appreciate what you're trying to achieve. How are you gonna ensure like engagement? How are you gonna reach out to the public? How are you gonna get like a citizen involvement in one way or the other?
Well, thank you very much. It's interesting but a difficult issue, I think, because then public engagement or social involvement, and the role of public engagement varies depending on the issue, I think. And for the case of the goal setting for Moonshot, it's quite interesting, I think. But climate change goal, okay? It's an international agreement. In the Paris Agreement, global net zero emission is agreed in the latter half part of this century. But after the publishment of the IPCC's 1.5 degrees C special report, the IPCC is a science and technology body, and so no policy relevant information is collected, but not the policy prescriptive. It's rather difficult in speaking English, but special report says 1.5 degrees C goal could be achieved with some technologies or social scenarios. Then the public sentiment or public movement quite stimulated. So the target or goal of net zero emission get near. So even for the year 2050, carbon neutral should be pursued. For the scientists related to this, or not scientists, but policy analysts, in the global warming, climate change issues. Global net zero emission by 2050 is impossible, to my understanding. So there are still very big gap of public desire and how to say scientific feasibilities. The scientific feasibility includes it is possible, but no mentioning about the cost.
Yeah.
Okay, climate change is not an only sustainability issues. We set 17 SDGs goal.
Yeah.
So the balance is important. So how to communicate real state of science and engineering is very important, I think.
Well, I think that's a great point because it's a cost associated. It's not just the technology. And then it's more important to have like a public to understand whether to accept the cost or not accept the cost. It's always things like we have to take things in a perspective. I think I think we had a great discussion. I think time is running out right now, but I think it's a very interesting, a very great point made by Adachi-san and Ando-san about like all the public engagement and equals for everyone. The town hall is possible solutions and involving the young researchers. At the same time, there's a diversity in the type of moonshot, the diversity because of the government moonshot or private moonshot, where like XPRIZE or like a RoboCup. This is a private effort, collectively, and each team is getting at the government funding, but like entity itself is a private, so we're going for 20 years and then keep going for another 30 years. So it's don't have to worry about a government funding cut. Whether we have like worry about the government funding cut because the government is the sole body of the funding this moonshot. So we might have to switch to semi-government or private initiative down the road so we can secure the funding if we really want. So we kind of have a lot of things to think about. It's very informative, and that requires a lot of engagement with the public and a multi-stakeholder. I think after all, we need diversity, multi-stakeholder, and go for lunch. Well, thank you very much. Yes. Yeah, so
I think one important thing that we have to remember is there need to be a scientific basis for everything.
Yes, of course.
So
yes,
we do work for the challenging topics, but science should be there. So we should not forget
exactly. I mean, I think we're very careful. We got the big goal, dream, it's fine, but if that's not scientifically based, we can't achieve and we just disappoint and it's completely demoralize all the scientific activity. That's a very good point as well. Finally, I think we have like an avatar waiting for a final question. So like Horio-san, can you have the questions? Do you have a question?
Question?
Yeah.
So today we heard many people talk about the importance of diversity in achieving goals. How can corporations participate to add new perspectives in this Moonshot program?
So this is our company. Well, I think this is for me to answer because I'm sort of involved in the designing side. I think we're going to have an open call. Everyone can participate, like university, national lab, and the companies. And at the same time, there will be opportunity for the technology to cover out, create startup companies or like license out to the major companies. And you can form the group domestically or internationally. I think there are range of ways. I mean, I think it will be like a design process for the core, and that really depends on the government side to decide in the final structure of the program, and that will be yet to be seen. But like I think that we're in process of creating structure of the funding scheme and the entire program operation scheme. Well, thank you very much. Well, with that question, we would like to close the sessions, and we'll. In the program, we said we're gonna have a break, but like, sorry, I'm running out of time, overtime. So we don't have any break here, and we're gonna have like some summary speech. So before this, panelists, thank you very much, and please go down the stage. Thank you very much.
President Kitano and all the panelists, thank you very much.